What's up today, guys? So I just released a video about the Fuel EX8, just an in-person live look at the new 2022s. I have already done one on the Trek Marlin 5 before, but I thought I'd compare the two for examples to help people realize the difference between, say, an $800 bike and a $4,800 bike. Where does $4,000 come from? How much is the difference? And is it worth it to the upgrade? Let's find out. Alright, so behind me I have both the Fuel EX and the Trek Marlin 5. They are both very, very popular bikes. So the Fuel EX is obviously Trek's go-to all-purpose mountain bike. Now, you are not advertised in any which way to commute on this thing, but you could. You are not advertised in any which way to do a gravel ride on it, but it's telling you you can. What you can do with this thing though is shred pretty much any trail out there. I mean, you could take this to the top of Whistler Mountain and make it to the bottom very, very easily. But the Trek Marlin 5 on the other hand is also a pretty capable bike. Now, it is definitely more advertised to commute on it. It is definitely more advertised to go on lighter trails. But surprisingly enough, people take these everywhere. I've seen them at downhill parks. I've seen them at really aggressive terrain I wouldn't take it on. I've seen people destroy rims on this bike doing trails I'm doing on this thing. So don't be afraid to go into that big, more adventurous trail riding. Top of Whistler Mountain to down, I don't know if it'll be able to handle it. And why is that? So, the Trek Marlin 5 has simply no way near as much suspension. Let's ignore the fact for a minute that the Trek Marlin 5 does not even have a rear shock. This simply only has the front shock. Comparatively to the front shock of the Fuel EX8, it has a lot less. The Fuel EX8 has 140 mils of travel. Depending on the size of the Trek Marlin you're on, you have 80 to 100 mils of travel. So there's a significant amount more motion and movement that front fork can do. As well, the Trek Marlin, it has 30 mil stanchions. Now it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is the size of the actual metal piece with shafts that moves up and down. The Fuel EX has 34 mil. Now, the big difference with that is they are much, much stiffer. The quality of materials and the thicknesses they can do and the tolerances that can be taken on a thicker and bigger and more robust cylinder makes it for a much stiffer ride. Now, benefit of that is essentially the fork isn't going to flex as much when entering itself. When it's collapsing, it's not going to force its way down. It's just going to easily bounce up and down really nicely. And that'll make the fork work better. It'll make the bike handle better. It'll make it feel better for you. And therefore, you'll be able to ride it better. And that's just one part of it. When you're looking at a $4,000 price difference, which conveniently, that is exactly the difference in Canadian dollars right now, and it's probably pretty similar in most other currencies now, there is a lot more to go with. Now, both of them have hydraulic disc brakes. That works great. How can you say one's better than the other? Well, they work mechanically the exact same. There is fluid in there, you pull it, it pushes a piston, pushes pistons below to pinch the brake. Pretty simple. But what differences are the sizes of those pistons and the number of them. So on the brakes on a Fuel EX, it's going to have much larger chambers to actually push the pressure and harder pulls, better mechanics, everything's going to work a lot better. And then when it gets down, you go to a 4 piston. So there is literally 4 individual pistons pushing on that brake to make it stop, and it's going to have a lot more bite, as well as surface area brake pad where it's really biting down. The Trek Marlin 5 only has a dual piston, so it just doesn't have as much surface area, it doesn't cover as much ground when being pushed. The cylinders, internals, all that are not as large, not as much pressure, and then things are made a little more cheaply in a cost-effective savings way as opposed to a performance way, which costs a lot more money for the R&D of it. You're even talking the brake rotors themselves. I mean, it doesn't look like much when you compare them. You look at a Marlin 5 one and you look at a Fuel EX one, and they don't look that much different. But the size of them, the shape, the design, the thickness of that rotor changes. So again, it holds itself together better. It disperses heat much better so that the brake fade doesn't happen. And brake fade happens when brakes get too hot. So if you're getting too hot, they don't work. So by the time you're coming down Whistle Mountain, your brakes are going to be absolutely useless on a Trek Marlin, but on a Fuelie X, they're going to be working pretty good. I mean, there is a good chance. That's a long way down. Top of the world all the way down, it's a long way. Back to the commuting side of things, tires. Commuting with Marlin is going to be relatively efficient. You'll burn through the tires in a season or two, but depends how much you ride it, depends how much pavement, all that kind of jazz. With a Fuelie X, the tires on it come with are very soft compound, very traction, which is great when you're in soft compound, traction-y stuff. When you're on paved roads, paths, even hard gravel, you're going to destroy those tires. They're going to be bumpy. I mean, you see the guys in the big jacked up trucks. You can hear them coming down the road. You can hear the tire. You can hear it. You can feel it. It is not good for commuting. But ramming a corner really hard, much better. So it's a bit of a compromise because you could put those tires on a Marlin. You're going to lose a bit of commuting to it, but it's going to work a lot better off-road. So that's an interchangeable part, which isn't that big of a deal. What isn't really interchangeable is the rims. So the rims on the Fuelie X are made with higher tolerances, stiffer compounds, better quality, all that same jazz with pretty much everything on the bike, but it's also tubeless ready. Now, on some of the Trek Marlins, you can get tubeless ready rims, and that is nice, but not with the Trek Marlin 5. And there are some hacks out there, but I've never actually tried any, so I don't have any personal usage or know-how if it works very well. Technically speaking, if you would fill these with a fluid and take out the tube, the liquid would just leak through all the spoke holes, seams, everywhere. It would not seal. Downside to that is you have a higher chance of pinch flats. You can't run as low pressures without risking that kind of puncture, and then you're just replacing a tube more often. Or worst case scenario, you're damaging the tire because you're actually pinching it too aggressively, so you just can't do it. It's not possible. Don't even try it. If you do, send me a link to your YouTube video of you hacking it, because I'd like to see if duct tape really does a good job and if it saves you any weight. Little details now which really make that riding experience better. One, the geometry. So geometry, you hear it a lot. It changes a lot, and little changes change the bike a lot. It's pretty impressive what they can do with seat tube and forks and just tweaking things just a teeny bit, and it makes them so much better to ride, especially downhill. Now, commuting wise, again, the Trek Marlin is going to be better for that. It's going to be a little more agile, a little more twitchy, but the Fuelie X, when you're rolling over things, coming down steep descents, or even flowy stuff, it's going to roll and attack obstacles much better, but technically be a little slower if you were agile through cars. A little bit, but the more important is you'll be much faster on the trail on a Fuelie X than you ever would be on a Trek Marlin, depending on the rider, of course. Another little detail is the dropper post. Now, this is one of those things you can add, but it does not come stock with the Trek Marlin 5. A dropper post is a post which works just like an office chair. You push a switch, you put the weight on it, it goes down, it's out of your way. It feels so good. You can really get more motion through the bike. You can get back over your rear wheel and push the bike forward over obstacles, downhills, rough terrain. It really makes a difference. Again, you can add it to the Trek Marlin, but now we're adding more money to it. If you did just a few couple things, you're busting into the Trek Marlin 7, Trek Marlin 8 range, where it comes stock with many of these features. A couple other little details is even the aluminum level on it is higher quality, cleaner, purer. Essentially, it's lighter weight. That's what's on the Trek Fuelie X8. It is a better overall frame. It's stiffer design. It's wider. If you compare the two side by side, there's literally thicker frame, thinner frame. This is just going to take way more of a beating. It's going to absolutely annihilate trails compared to a Trek Marlin, where you may be able to make it down it, but you're going to feel a lot more of the hits than you would on the Fuelie X. We do also have that rear shock, which the Marlin just doesn't have, can't have, wouldn't be able to be added, and that's going to make your braking, suspension, whole bike work a lot smoother in the off-road terrain. Downside to a shock is it does add more complications, a lot more cost, more maintenance, and for commuting, it serves little to no purpose that an in-seat post suspension would do for you. So that's point sometimes to the Trek Marlin. It's a lot of everything that makes up $4,000. And you really start noticing it when you're trying to pick out the little pieces here and there. Like I said, the aluminum is different quality as is. So there's one point. But even things like the geometry tweaks, you're like, well, that doesn't cost more to just weld it differently. No, not really. But it does cost more to add a flip chip in to be able to have two different geometries on the same bike, which the Fuel X does and the Trek Marlin does not. It costs more to manufacture these kind of complicated smaller mechanisms for the shocks in the rear and all that kind of stuff. The cables are even ran with a nicer clip system, so it's easier to change, maintain, and runs a lot quieter than a Trek Marlin would. They literally just kind of free float in the frame. These ones are more zip tied, held down, so it's just less noisy, less chance of issues. Little details which add up to a lot. And just the fact that a front fork goes from probably $150 cost to like $800 cost. The fork alone is worth as much as the bike. So there's some ways you can't make the Fuel X much cheaper. We've got the Fuel X8, which I'm comparing it against. Obviously, they get all the way down to around the $3,300 mark with the Fuel X5, but we're still a big jump from where the Marlin 5 was. Now, if you close it a little closer and you went to a Marlin 8, you're all the way up at $1,500 to $3,000. You're halfway there. You're just adding in a shock. You're adding in a little better seat post. You're adding in a little bit better frame quality. And you're actually realizing, oh, it's not that far off between those bikes. It's actually a very nice bleed way. But a lot of people come in and they wonder what the big deal is. How do you get to $4,000 from $800? And the point is, you do because there's like 10 bikes in between there. And each one you can buy with that little upgrade to it all the way to a $4,000 difference. It doesn't just jump. And that is something I think people kind of lose sight of. Even when you look at a $10,000 bike, you go, whoa, how's a bike $10,000? It's the same thing's over, but it doesn't just go from the $5,000 to $10,000. There's a 6, there's a 7, there's an 8, there's a 9, and then there's a $10,000 bike, each getting better and better and better, finer refinements, and then sometimes you're just paying for a really fancy paint job. So it's hard to recommend one or the other. Obviously, it depends what you're doing more than anything. If you're commuting 100% of the time, I wouldn't buy a $4,000+ mountain bike because it's not going to be the most efficient. The maintenance costs on a Marlin 5 are going to be so much cheaper than what a Fuel X8 would be. Even things like the chain and the cassette, which we'll wear, are half the price, if not a third or less, on the Marlin. And this is something you could potentially wear out more on a Trek Marlin than you would a Fuel X if this was your weekend bike and that was your daily commuter. So you got to really take these things into consideration, know what your purpose is, and then narrow it down from there. Don't just categorize all bikes as the same thing because they really are not. All right, that was a quick blurb. That was all I had. 2 bikes, 2 options, big difference in price, and hopefully this was kind of enjoyable to someone. All right, good luck. Thank you.